The darkness of space stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced glass of the cockpit. Captain Alexander "Alex" Carter gritted his teeth, his hands steady on the control panel as alarms blared around him. His ship, the Argus 7, was caught in the chaos of a violent energy storm, one that hadn't been on any star maps. Static crackled in his earpiece as his co-pilot, Kieran Drake, shouted over the interference. "Alex, that last surge fried our primary thrusters. We're losing altitude. Fast!" Alex's jaw tightened. He was already pulling every trick in the book, rerouting power, trying to stabilize their descent, but the storm wasn't giving them a chance. The swirling mass of blue and white energy outside pulsed like a living thing, tearing through space as if searching for something, or someone. The planet below, Zyphera Prime, loomed larger with each passing second. It was a world shrouded in mystery, its shimmering surface concealed beneath thick, silvery clouds. No human had ever set foot on it. The Zypherans were known but kept to themselves, their civilization advanced yet deeply secretive. And now, fate, or misfortune, was sending him straight into their domain. "Brace for impact!" Alex shouted, gripping the console as the ship's hull groaned under the strain. The Argus 7 crashed through the planet's upper atmosphere, flames licking its exterior as it spiraled downward. Alex barely had time to activate emergency protocols before everything went black. A sharp pain in his ribs pulled Alex back to consciousness. His surroundings were unfamiliar. Soft, luminous walls of pulsing violet light enclosed him, shifting like they were responding to his presence. A metallic clang. His wrists were bound, Zyphera in cuffs. He flexed his fingers, feeling the restriction of the alien metal. His head throbbed, but his instincts told him he wasn't alone. A voice, smooth, commanding, and laced with unmistakable authority, cut through the silence. "You're awake." Alex lifted his head and met her gaze. Princess Seraphina Elyon. She was nothing like he had expected. The Zypherans were said to be ethereal beings, almost ghost-like in their luminous beauty. But there was nothing fragile about the woman standing before him. She was a warrior, her silver-blue armor sculpted to perfection, her long midnight hair cascading over one shoulder in a braid adorned with glowing crystalline threads. But it was her eyes, piercing violet and burning with intelligence, that held him captive. Her presence filled the chamber like a storm just waiting to unleash its fury. "Who are you?" she demanded, taking a step closer. Alex exhaled slowly. His training dictated that he should keep his answers minimal, but something about the way she looked at him told him that evasiveness would only make things worse. "Captain Alexander Carter, Terran Alliance," he answered evenly. Seraphina's gaze flickered to the insignia on his torn uniform before returning to his face, unreadable. "You are trespassing on Zypheran territory," she said, each word deliberate. "What is your purpose here?" Alex held her gaze. "That storm took down my ship. I had no choice." She tilted her head slightly, as if measuring the weight of his words. "And your presence here is purely accidental?" she challenged, skepticism thick in her voice. "You expect me to believe that a Terran military officer just happens to crash on my planet?" Alex let out a short, humorless laugh. "Believe whatever you want, Princess, but if I had planned to come here, don't you think I would have landed in a better condition?" Her lips pressed into a thin line, irritation flashing across her features. Alex had no doubt that most men quailed under her scrutiny, but he had faced worse. Seraphina glanced at the guards flanking the chamber. "Increase the security. No one enters without my authorization," she ordered, before turning back to him. "Until we determine whether you are a threat, you are to be confined. Do not test my patience, Captain." "Wasn't planning on it," Alex muttered, though his sharp mind was already working on every possible escape route. Before another word could be exchanged, the chamber shook violently. A deep explosion rumbled from outside, followed by the sharp sounds of weapons firing. Seraphina immediately stiffened, her hand flying to the blade at her hip. "What in the stars?" she murmured before the doors burst open and one of her guards stumbled in, blood trailing down his armor. "Your Highness," the soldier gasped. "The Revenant faction. They've breached the perimeter." Seraphina's expression darkened. The Revenants, a rogue Zypheran faction known for their brutality, had been growing bolder. But an attack this deep into the palace was unheard of. No time for hesitation. She turned to Alex. "You stay here," she commanded. But before she could move, another explosion rocked the structure. The walls cracked, sending shards of bioluminescent crystal raining down. The lights flickered. Alex saw it before she did. The enemy soldier bursting through the side entrance, weapon raised, aiming straight for her. Instinct overruled logic. Alex lunged, twisting his body despite the restraints and crashing into Seraphina. The blast from the weapon scorched the air where she had stood just seconds before. The force sent them both tumbling to the ground. Her weight pressed against his chest for a heartbeat before she rolled free, drawing her blade in a fluid motion. She slashed through the attacker before he could fire again, her movements effortless, lethal. More soldiers stormed in. Alex knew she could hold her own, but she was still outnumbered. "Uncuff me!" he shouted over the chaos. "I can help you fight!" Seraphina didn't trust him, not yet. But she wasn't blind either. He had just saved her life. After a beat of hesitation, she slashed through his bindings with her dagger. Alex rubbed his wrists, flexing his fingers, and within seconds, he was on his feet, disarming an enemy soldier with swift precision. A silent understanding passed between them. For now, they weren't enemies. For now, they had a common threat. When the last of the Revenant attackers fell, the room was left in eerie silence. Seraphina turned to Alex, her chest rising and falling, her blade still dripping with faint silver-blue blood. "You fight well," she admitted. Alex gave a lopsided grin. "For a threat?" Seraphina's gaze flickered with something undecipherable. But before she could answer, something else caught her attention. The crystal shard on the floor near Alex's boot was glowing. No, not just glowing. Reacting. Seraphina's eyes widened as the ancient Zypheran stone pulsed in rhythm with his touch, casting light patterns that no outsider should have been capable of triggering. Alex frowned. "Is that normal?" Seraphina's breath hitched. Number it wasn't. And suddenly Alex Carter was more than just an uninvited guest. He was a mystery that could change everything. The forest of Zyphera Prime was unlike anything Alex had ever seen. Towering crystalline trees stretched toward the sky, their translucent branches pulsing with soft, bioluminescent hues. The ground beneath his boots was smooth, yet solid, shifting colors with every step, as if responding to his presence. The air was thick with a strange energy, charged with something almost alive. His breathing was shallow, his side burning with every movement. Blood soaked through the torn fabric of his uniform, staining his fingers as he pressed against the wound. The battle had left him drained, but stopping wasn't an option. Not with Seraphina at his side. Not with their pursuers close behind. She moved ahead of him, silent and precise, every step calculated. Even in the dim glow of the luminescent flora, she was a striking figure. Her long braids swayed as she moved, and her armor, though dented from the earlier fight, still carried an undeniable elegance. She was trained for this environment, a warrior in every sense, but even she wasn't unaffected by the chaos they had barely escaped. Alex wasn't sure what surprised him more, that she had freed him from his restraints, or that she hadn't abandoned him once the fight had ended. He had expected her to disappear the moment she got the chance, but instead, she had dragged him to safety, navigating the dense terrain with the efficiency of someone who had spent her life mastering it. A rustling behind them snapped Alex's focus back to the present. He reached for the energy weapon he had taken from one of the fallen attackers, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. He wasn't sure how much longer he could keep going like this. Seraphina turned, her sharp eyes scanning him. She had barely spoken since their escape, but her gaze was calculating. She was assessing him, not just his injury, but his resilience. "You're slowing down," she said, her voice low but firm. "Not my fault your planet has a thing for stabbing guests," he muttered, adjusting his grip on his side. For a moment, something flickered in her expression, something that almost resembled amusement. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by the cold logic that seemed to dictate her every move. She stepped closer, eyes narrowing as she studied him. "You won't make it far like this." "Don't have much of a choice, do I?" he shot back. Another rustle, closer this time. Seraphina's hand flew to the blade at her hip. Alex tensed, ignoring the pain as he raised his weapon. Then, a shadow moved through the trees. Seraphina reacted first, her blade flashing as she lunged. The attacker barely had time to raise his weapon before she struck, her movements fluid, lethal. Alex fired a shot at another figure in the distance, the energy blast cutting through the unnatural darkness. More were coming. Too many. Seraphina grabbed his arm. "We need to keep moving." They ran. The forest blurred around them as they moved deeper into the unknown. The terrain grew rougher, the luminescent trees casting eerie patterns of light. Alex's body screamed in protest, but he kept going, forced forward by instinct, by necessity. Seraphina led the way, her pace relentless. But even she couldn't hide the tension in her shoulders, the way her breath came quicker than before. They were both reaching their limits. Alex's vision swam. His legs faltered, and before he could catch himself, his knees hit the ground. He barely registered the sharp intake of breath from Seraphina before she was beside him, gripping his shoulder. "You're bleeding too much," she said, pressing against his side with more force than necessary. He hissed in pain, but forced a smirk. "Not the worst first date I've had." Seraphina didn't smile, but her grip softened. She pulled a small device from the compartment of her armor, pressing it against his wound. A dull warmth spread through him, easing the sharpest edges of the pain, but the exhaustion remained. As she worked, her movements careful but efficient, he watched her, noting the tension in her jaw, the unspoken thoughts behind her guarded eyes. "Why did you do that?" she asked, her voice quieter now. He frowned. "Do what?" "In the palace. You saved me." She hesitated, as if the words were foreign to her. "You didn't have to." He exhaled, leaning back against the base of a glowing tree. "You were the only one in that room who didn't try to kill me first." Her gaze flickered, searching his face as if looking for some deeper truth. "You could have run," she said. He let out a breathy laugh. "Guess I'm bad at that." Silence stretched between them. The sounds of the forest hummed around them, a quiet rhythm beneath the chaos that had led them here. Seraphina looked away first, shifting slightly, her fingers tightening against the hilt of her blade. There was something about this moment that felt fragile. Unspoken things hovering just out of reach. She was different from the warriors he had faced before. Different from the rulers who commanded with distance and authority. There was something in her eyes, a conflict, a hesitation that didn't belong to someone who only saw him as an enemy. But the walls she had built around herself were high, reinforced with years of duty, of expectation, and he wasn't sure if she would ever let them crumble. She stood abruptly. "We need to keep moving. There's a place ahead where we can rest properly." He nodded, pushing himself up with more effort than he wanted to admit. Seraphina didn't offer to help, but she didn't look away either. As they continued through the glowing forest, Alex found himself wondering about the woman beside him. She had saved him. He had saved her. They weren't allies. Not yet. But they weren't enemies either. And that, perhaps, was more dangerous than anything else. The glow of the Zypheran moon bathed the ancient ruins in a pale, otherworldly light. Towering crystalline spires jutted from the ground like remnants of a forgotten civilization, their surfaces etched with symbols far older than any living Zypheran could remember. A whisper of energy pulsed through the air, humming beneath the soles of their feet like the heartbeat of something ancient, waiting to be awakened. Seraphina ran her fingers along the engraved stone, tracing the delicate patterns with silent reverence. The markings were faint but unmistakable, the language of her ancestors, long before Zyphera had become the guarded world it was today. She had spent her life studying history, but never had she seen anything quite like this. Alex stood beside her, arms crossed, his gaze flickering between the symbols and the luminous trees surrounding them. The place felt unsettlingly familiar. A strange sense of déjà vu settled in his chest, like a memory lingering at the edges of his mind, just out of reach. Seraphina exhaled slowly, pressing a hand against one of the stones. The moment her palm met the surface, the ruins came alive. A ripple of golden light surged through the carvings, illuminating the faded text until it gleamed like fire against the darkened sky. She stepped back, barely breathing as the ancient script translated itself in real time, its meaning unraveling before them. When the stars align and the sky sends forth its traveler, the bridge between realms shall awaken, the one from beyond will walk among us, and with his arrival, the path to unity shall be revealed. He alone will wield the power of harmony, for he is of two worlds, tied by fate, bound by time. Seraphina's pulse quickened. The prophecy was clear. Someone from the stars, someone not of Zyphera, would be the key to a new era. But what made her breath hitch wasn't just the words. It was the way the ruins had responded. They had been dormant for centuries, refusing to react to even the most revered scholars. Yet now, at this moment, in his presence, they had awakened. She turned slowly, her gaze locking onto Alex. He wasn't looking at her. His eyes were fixed on the glowing script, his expression unreadable. "You've seen this before, haven't you?" she asked, her voice quieter than before. Alex didn't answer right away. His fingers twitched at his side, his jaw tightening, as if wrestling with something he couldn't quite explain. A memory stirred within him, something buried deep, something he had long dismissed as nothing more than childhood dreams. But standing here, feeling the pulse of energy through his bones, he wasn't so sure anymore. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice rougher than usual. "But it feels like I should." Seraphina studied him. His uncertainty wasn't a lie. He truly didn't remember. But some part of him recognized this place, and that was more terrifying than if he had simply been deceiving her. "Are you certain you've never been here before?" she pressed, stepping closer. Alex let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. "I told you. My ship crashed. I didn't come here on purpose." "That's not what I asked." His gaze met hers then, sharp and searching. And for the first time since they met, she saw something unsettled in his eyes. He was a soldier, hardened by battle, unshaken even in the face of an ambush. But this was different. This wasn't an enemy he could fight with weapons. "I don't know," he murmured. "But I feel like I've been here before. And I don't know why." The silence between them grew heavier, charged with something neither of them could name. Seraphina turned back to the glowing script, her mind racing. If the prophecy was true, if the writings of her ancestors were more than just forgotten legends, then Alex's presence here was no accident. It was fate. She clenched her fists. Zyphera had spent centuries keeping outsiders away, guarding their world with secrecy and strength. But what if they had been wrong? What if, all this time, they had been waiting for him? The thought was dangerous. The council would never accept it so easily. As if summoned by her thoughts, a low hum filled the air. A moment later, a sleek airship descended from the sky, its deep blue metallic hull reflecting the moonlight. The insignia of the Zypheran High Council gleamed against its side. Alex tensed instinctively, but Seraphina didn't move. She had anticipated this. The moment the ruins had activated, the council would have been alerted. They would come seeking answers. The ship landed, and from it emerged 4 figures cloaked in ceremonial robes, their expressions unreadable as they approached. At the front was High Chancellor Valus, his silver-threaded robe billowing slightly as he stopped before Seraphina. "You have disturbed the sacred grounds," the Chancellor stated, his voice even but heavy with meaning. "Explain." Seraphina squared her shoulders. "The ruins responded," she said, motioning to the still-glowing inscriptions. "And it wasn't because of me." The Chancellor's eyes shifted to Alex, his gaze scrutinizing. "A human," he said, almost dismissively. "Impossible." Alex met his stare without flinching. "Trust me, you're not the first person to say that today." A flicker of something unreadable passed through Valus's features before he turned his attention back to the carvings. His fingers traced the glowing script, lips pressing together. Whatever doubt he carried, the undeniable truth was staring him in the face. The council had spent decades trying to decipher these ruins, and they had remained lifeless. Until now. Valus exhaled slowly, If this is true, then we cannot ignore what has happened here, he admitted, though his tone was reluctant. He turned to Seraphina. There is only one way to know for certain. Seraphina already knew what he was going to say, but it didn't make it any easier. The trials, she murmured. The Chancellor nodded. If the prophecy is real, then he must prove it. He must undergo the 7 trials of unity. Alex lifted an eyebrow. Sounds like a lot of effort for someone who just wants to leave. You don't have a choice, Seraphina told him, her voice softer this time. Not if you want answers. Alex studied her for a long moment. He could walk away, try to fight his way out, steal a ship, disappear into the vastness of space. But there was a part of him that needed to understand what was happening. Because whether he liked it or not, something inside him had awakened here, and he wasn't sure he could ignore it anymore. The ceremonial chamber was unlike anything Alex had ever seen. Towering crystal pillars pulsed with an otherworldly glow, casting shifting patterns of light across the smooth, reflective floor. The atmosphere was dense with energy, humming with a silent power that sent chills across his skin. At the far end of the room stood Seraphina, her gaze steady but unreadable, her hands resting lightly at her sides. The High Chancellor's voice echoed through the chamber, his tone both solemn and commanding. The 7 trials of unity are not merely tests of strength or intellect. They are a measure of the soul, a way to determine if an outsider can truly become one with Zyphera. His sharp gaze fell on Alex. Fail, and you will be cast from this world forever. Succeed, and your fate will be forever intertwined with ours. Alex exhaled, rolling his shoulders to ease the lingering stiffness from his wounds. No pressure then. The first trial began with the clash of metal against metal. The greatest Zypheran warrior, a formidable fighter named Raylith, stepped into the ring. His armor shimmered, responding to his movements, adapting to his speed. He moved like a shadow, fluid and deadly, his blade cutting through the air with precision. Alex barely dodged the first strike, feeling the rush of energy as it skimmed past his ribs. He countered with swift footwork, landing a solid hit against Raylith's side. The warrior didn't falter. He only grinned, eyes gleaming with approval. They fought in silence, the rhythm of their battle a dance of instinct and survival. Alex had faced countless opponents in his life, but none like this. Zypherans fought differently, their weapons an extension of their very being. Every movement carried intent, every strike fueled by the energy of their planet. The match ended when Alex managed to disarm Raylith, his blade pressing lightly against the warrior's throat. A moment of stillness passed before Raylith stepped back, nodding in acknowledgement. You fight like one of us, he admitted. The second trial was less physical, but no less challenging. Alex stood before an ancient stone tablet, its surface covered in intricate shifting symbols. Zypheran script was complex, woven with layers of meaning that only those attuned to their energy could decipher. Seraphina stood beside him, her voice soft but firm. The text responds to those who understand it, not just in mind, but in heart. Alex studied the patterns, the flickering glow between the lines. He had spent years decoding enemy transmissions, breaking codes under pressure, but this was different. This required something more than logic. He closed his eyes, focusing on the way the symbols pulsed, listening to the rhythm in the air around him. And then, the meaning unraveled before him. He spoke the words aloud, the translation flowing effortlessly from his lips. As he finished, the tablet flared with brilliant light, the markings shifting in acknowledgement. Seraphina's expression was unreadable, but there was something in her gaze, something like awe. The third trial was the hardest yet. A chamber filled with shifting energy awaited him, its walls rippling with illusions drawn from the depths of his mind. The trial of fear. He barely had time to react before the shadows coalesced into something far more terrifying than any battlefield he had faced. A ruined city, smoke rising from the wreckage, and among the debris, his family. They were only echoes, but the pain hit like a physical blow. The memories he had buried, the guilt he had carried, all laid bare before him. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Seraphina's voice cut through the fog. It's not real, Alex. Her hand found his, grounding him, reminding him of where he was. You survived, she whispered. You're still here, and you are more than your past. The illusion wavered, and then it shattered. The fourth trial forced him to do something even harder. Seraphina stood across from him, her violet eyes searching his. The trial of pain requires truth, she said. You must speak of your greatest sorrow. He hesitated, the weight of years pressing against him. Then, in a quiet voice, he spoke. He told her about the war, about the day his home burned, about the people he couldn't save. He spoke of the guilt, the endless nights of wondering if he could have done more. When he finished, there was no judgment in her eyes, only understanding. She reached out, fingertips brushing his face, a gesture so unexpected, so intimate, that it stole his breath. You carry so much, she murmured. But you don't have to carry it alone. The fifth trial was a test of trust. The labyrinth stretched before them, a twisting maze suspended in a state of shifting gravity. The walls moved unpredictably, the floor vanishing beneath them at random intervals. Seraphina took his hand. If we let go of each other, we won't find our way out. They moved together, navigating the shifting pathways, relying on instinct and faith. When a chasm opened beneath them, Alex pulled Seraphina to him, holding her close as they floated weightlessly for a heartbeat before gravity reasserted itself. They landed hard, tangled together. Alex let out a rough laugh. Well, that was interesting. Seraphina didn't move right away. Her breath was warm against his neck, her body pressed against his in the most unexpected way. When she finally looked at him, something flickered in her expression. Something fragile, something real. Neither of them spoke of it, but neither of them forgot. The sixth trial was one of energy, a direct test of his connection to Zyphera itself. A massive crystal stood in the center of the chamber, its light pulsing. Place your hands on it, Seraphina instructed. If the planet accepts you, it will respond. Alex hesitated. He had no reason to believe it would work. He was human. Zyphera was not his home. But as his palms met the surface, a surge of warmth flooded through him. The crystal pulsed, its glow shifting, harmonizing to his own rhythm. Seraphina's breath caught. I don't believe it, she whispered. The final trial was the most dangerous, the trial of unity, a test of the soul itself. Seraphina faced him, her violet eyes dark with uncertainty. If we fail this... Alex took her hands. We won't. The ritual began. Energy surged between them, binding their essences together. For a moment he felt everything, her strength, her fear, her longing. And she felt his. They became something more than two people, and when it ended, Seraphina looked at him with something he had never seen before. I never believed in fate, she whispered. Not until you. The Zypheran palace stood bathed in the glow of the twin moons, its crystalline walls shimmering with an ethereal light. It was a place of elegance and power, a fortress of knowledge and secrets. But tonight, something darker lurked within its halls. The air was tense, thick with the weight of unspoken treachery. Alex could feel it before he saw it. The unsettling stillness of the guards stationed near the entrance, the way their shoulders were rigid, their eyes avoiding his as he and Seraphina stepped through the grand corridor. She was speaking to him about the next phase of the trials, her voice calm, but there was an urgency in the way she moved. He could tell something was off, though he couldn't quite place what. Then the attack came. The air was sliced by the sudden hum of an energy weapon. The walls, which had moments ago been glowing peacefully, pulsed red in response to the sudden disruption. A figure stepped from the shadows, their face partially obscured by the gleam of their metallic armor. You should not have come this far. The voice was cold, detached. Seraphina barely had time to react before more figures emerged from the dark corners of the corridor, their weapons trained on them. Alex was already moving, reaching for his own weapon, his instinct screaming at him to shield Seraphina. But before he could fire, one of the attackers pressed a device to the wall, and a pulse of blue energy shot through the chamber. The force of it hit him like a hammer, sending him to his knees as his vision blurred. His limbs felt heavy, his mind sluggish. His grip on his weapon slackened just as he saw Seraphina struggling against two of the assailants. She fought fiercely, landing blows that sent her captors stumbling back, but she was outnumbered. One of them struck her from behind, and she fell forward, barely catching herself on her hands. Alex's vision cleared just in time to see one of them grab her roughly by the arm. "No!" His voice was raw, but his body refused to cooperate, the lingering effects of the energy pulse still anchoring him down. Seraphina twisted in their grip, her violet eyes blazing with fury. "You dare betray your own people!" she spat. One of the attackers stepped forward, removing the mask that obscured his face. "High Counselor Valus." Alex's blood ran cold. "You?" Seraphina's voice was a mixture of shock and fury. The elder counselor looked at her with something almost like pity. "You were never meant to complete the trials, Your Highness. Your path was decided long before this outsider arrived." Alex fought against the weight of the energy blast, forcing himself to move even as his muscles screamed in protest. "Let her go." His voice was low, dangerous. Valus barely spared him a glance. "You don't understand, Captain Carter. This is bigger than you, bigger than her." He gestured to the soldiers holding Seraphina. "Take her." They moved as one, dragging Seraphina backward toward the exit. She kicked, fought, but even she could not break free from the hold of three fully armored warriors. Alex surged forward, but his body was still sluggish. He reached for his weapon, but before he could fire, one of the soldiers slammed a fist into his stomach, knocking the wind from his lungs. He fell forward, landing hard on one knee. His vision swam, but through the haze, he saw her one last time before they pulled her through the doorway. Her gaze met his. It wasn't fear he saw in her eyes, but defiance. Then the doors slammed shut. The silence that followed was deafening. Alex clenched his fists, his breath coming in ragged gasps as his body trembled with rage. His mind screamed at him to move, to fight, to do something, but he was trapped in the suffocating realization of what had just happened. They had taken her. They had ripped her from his grasp, right in front of him, and he had been powerless to stop it. A sound built in his chest, raw and uncontainable. "Seraphina!" His voice echoed through the chamber, reverberating against the crystalline walls. But there was no answer. Only the cold emptiness of the space where she had stood moments before. For the first time since he had set foot on this planet, since he had been forced into these trials, since he had fought alongside her, he understood what fear truly was. It wasn't the fear of battle, of losing a war, or even of death. It was the fear of losing her. He forced himself to stand, his legs unsteady beneath him. He had no plan, no clear path forward, but none of that mattered. He would find her. He would burn the entire palace to the ground if he had to. Because one truth was now undeniable. He could not, would not, lose her. The night was thick with tension as Alex crouched behind the jagged rock formations overlooking the enemy stronghold. The Revenant's base sprawled across the valley, its dark spires clawing toward the sky like skeletal remains of a long-forgotten civilization. Faint red lights pulsed along the edges of the structures, and heavily armed guards patrolled the perimeter in synchronized formations. Alex had no backup, no support, and no guarantee he would make it out alive. But none of that mattered. Seraphina was inside. His hands tightened around the stolen Zephyrin weapon strapped to his back. His wounds from the previous battles still ached, but the thought of her, trapped, alone, burned away the pain. He forced himself to steady his breathing. He had come too far to fail now. He scanned the entrance, studying the rhythm of the patrols. There was a 2-second gap between shifts. That was all he needed. His body moved before his mind could protest. He launched himself forward, sprinting toward the first guard, his blade flashing under the dim light. He took the soldier down in a single swift motion, catching his collapsing body before it could hit the ground. One down. Sliding into the shadows, he moved deeper into the base. The corridors were dimly lit, constructed of a dark metallic alloy that absorbed most of the ambient light. Every corner was a potential ambush, every hallway a path to either Seraphina or his own demise. A group of guards rounded the corner ahead. He pressed himself against the cold metal wall, heart pounding. If he was caught now, there would be no second chance. He could take them down, but the commotion would alert the others. Then he saw it. A maintenance hatch just above the walkway. He scaled the wall quickly, slipping into the vent before the soldiers passed beneath him, their conversation muffled but tense. "She's stronger than we thought," one of them muttered. "Doesn't matter," another replied. "She won't hold out much longer." Alex's grip on his weapon tightened. He forced himself forward, crawling through the narrow space until he reached another opening. Peering through the grates, his breath caught. Seraphina. She was bound to a metal structure in the center of the room, her head hanging forward, dark strands of hair falling over her bruised face. Blood streaked her silver armor, and faint cracks in the glowing plates hinted at just how much damage she had endured. But she was still alive. That was all that mattered. Alex didn't waste another second. He kicked open the vent, dropping down into the chamber below. The two guards stationed near her barely had time to react before he struck. He dodged the first attack, disarming the closest soldier with a precise twist before driving his blade through the weak point in their armor. The second guard lunged, but Alex spun, delivering a powerful strike that sent them crashing to the floor. The room fell silent, except for the ragged sound of his breathing. He rushed to Seraphina, his hands moving instinctively to release the restraints binding her wrists. She stirred at his touch, her body sluggish from the exhaustion and wounds she had suffered. Her violet eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first. Then they found him. "Alex." Her voice was weak, barely above a whisper, but it hit him harder than any wound ever could. He swallowed hard, cutting through the last restraint. "I'm here. I've got you." She blinked, as if trying to process whether he was real or just another hallucination born from her pain. "You actually came back." His jaw tightened. "I never left." He helped her to her feet, steadying her as she leaned against him. She was weak, but the fire in her eyes remained. She wasn't broken. She never would be. Alarms blared through the facility. The fallen guards had triggered an alert. "They know we're here," he said. "Can you fight?" Seraphina inhaled deeply, her fingers curling around the hilt of the blade he handed her. Though she swayed slightly, she straightened, rolling her shoulders as if shaking off the pain. "You don't need to ask," she said, her voice stronger now. Footsteps thundered toward them. Alex took position at her side. For the first time, they were not just fighting for survival. They were fighting together. The door burst open, and the battle began. They moved as one, a perfect rhythm of instinct and trust. Alex blocked a strike aimed at Seraphina's side, twisting to disarm the attacker while she spun, driving her blade into another enemy's chest. She was a force of nature, her movements swift and deadly, her presence beside him an anchor. For the first time in his life, he wasn't fighting alone. A soldier lunged at her from behind. Alex caught the motion out of the corner of his eye and threw himself in the way, taking the brunt of the impact. Pain exploded in his side as the enemy's blade cut into him, but he didn't let it slow him. With a snarl, he drove his weapon through the attacker before collapsing against the nearest wall. "Alex." Seraphina's hands were on him in an instant, pressing against the wound, trying to stop the bleeding. He exhaled sharply, managing a weak grin. "We really need to stop getting stabbed." "Not funny," she snapped, but the worry in her eyes betrayed her sharp tone. The battle outside was still raging. They didn't have time for this. "You need to go," he rasped. "Get out of here while you can." Her expression darkened. "And leave you? Not a chance." "Seraphina." She silenced him with a glare that could have melted steel. "If you tell me to run, I swear I'll knock you unconscious and carry you myself." "Despite everything," he chuckled. "Now that I'd like to see." She shook her head, pressing a hand against his chest. "We finish this together." Alex met her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. In that moment, the weight of every battle, every word left unsaid, crystallized into something undeniable. If they survived this, if they made it out of here alive, he wouldn't let anything stand between them again. Seraphina shifted, positioning herself beside him once more, her stance unwavering. Ready? He took a steadying breath, pushing past the pain. Always. And with that, they charged forward into the storm. The dawn over Zyphera Prime painted the sky in brilliant hues of violet and gold, casting long shadows across the crystalline city. The battle was over. The revenants had been driven back, their forces scattered. The High Council, once divided in suspicion, now stood in humbled acknowledgement of what had transpired. Yet amidst the silence that followed victory, Alex found himself standing at the edge of the grand balcony of the palace, watching the first light touch the spires below. The war had been won, but something deep inside him told him this was only the beginning. A soft presence moved beside him, and then Seraphina was there. Her long braids still tangled from battle, her armor scuffed but no less regal. Her violet eyes met his, no longer filled with the cold calculation of a princess bound by duty, but with something far more profound. They had fought side by side. They had bled for each other, nearly died for each other. And now, there was no question left between them. She exhaled softly, her fingers reaching out to trace the faint scar along his jaw, a reminder of the countless fights they had endured. "You should rest," she murmured. Alex let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "After everything we just survived, I think sleep can wait." She was quiet for a moment, as if considering something far greater than words. Then, she took his hand and pressed it gently against her abdomen. He frowned slightly, confused, until he felt it, the faintest, warmest hum of life. His breath caught. Seraphina's voice was softer than he had ever heard it. "I never thought this was possible," she admitted. "No Zypheran has ever conceived a child with an off-worlder before." Alex's throat tightened. Of all the battles he had fought, all the impossible odds he had faced, nothing had ever shaken him quite like this. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her fingers tightening over his. "I can feel it. The energy inside me. It's different. It's—" She hesitated, then met his gaze with absolute certainty. "Ours." Alex swallowed hard, emotions warring inside him. He had come to this planet as an outsider, a trespasser, and now, he was something more. Something he had never expected to be. Seraphina studied him carefully, her voice turning playful despite the weight of their revelation. "Do you believe in fate now?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her, feeling her warmth against him, feeling the life that now connected them in ways he couldn't begin to explain. "I believe in us," he finally murmured. She smiled against his chest, allowing herself, for the first time in a long time, to simply exist in the moment. There was no throne between them, no war, no duty too heavy to bear alone. There was only this. Only them. But fate, as always, was not finished with them yet. A sudden pulse of energy rippled through the palace, vibrating through the very walls, sending a shimmer of light cascading down the corridors. The air grew thick with static, and then, as if answering some ancient call, a hidden mechanism deep within the palace activated. A large, circular panel in the center of the main chamber began to glow, revealing inscriptions older than any of them had ever seen. The language was Zypheran, but even Seraphina's eyes widened in surprise. The council members rushed into the room, their expressions ranging from awe to deep concern. "This has never happened before," one of the elders whispered. Seraphina stepped forward, her fingers brushing across the illuminated script. As the words became clear, she stiffened, and Alex saw something flash in her eyes: fear. He moved beside her, scanning the inscriptions. The translation formed in his mind even before she could speak it aloud. "The first union will bring forth new life, but with it, the harbinger of what was lost. The darkness that once was sealed will rise again, and only those bound by both realms may stand against it." A heavy silence fell over them. Alex exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. And here, I thought we were getting a break. Seraphina turned to him, the weight of the prophecy settling between them. The war with the revenants had been only one battle. Something larger was coming. Something far beyond the war they had just fought. She reached for his hand, their fingers intertwining. "It seems," she said, voice steady despite the gravity of the moment, "our journey is far from over." Alex looked at her, then at the ancient warning glowing beneath their feet. His grip on her hand tightened. "Yeah," he murmured. "Looks like destiny isn't done with us yet. Across the galaxies, across time itself. You've found your way here. Where are you watching from? Drop your location in the comments. Let's see how far across the universe our community reaches. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications, because tomorrow's episode will take you even deeper into the unknown. You won't want to miss it.